On the night of the 16th of May 1943, Lancaster bombers of 617 Squadron took off on a raid targeting a seemingly invulnerable target. What happened next would be one of the most audacious operations of the Second World War. This video will track exactly how Operation Chastise unfolded. The Ruhr Valley was at the heart of the German war manufacturing industry. Located on the western edge of Germany, it was an area of intense industrial activity. The idea to destroy dams servicing this area had been around for a long time. The dams produced a good deal of hydroelectric power, and their destruction would create power cuts, curtailing industrial activity. Once the huge quantities of water the dams held back were released, this would produce large-scale flooding. It was hoped these twin effects would have a serious and long-lasting negative effect on German war production. However, destroying a dam was easier said than done. Conventional bombing would have little effect. The great height and narrowness of the dams meant they were a difficult target. And any damage would only affect the top of the structure and not lead to a collapse. The problem of how to destroy the dams was considered by aeronautical engineer Barnes Wallis. He produced a report, including this drawing, on a proposed method of attacking the dams. Wallis came up with a solution so radical that some doubted it was even possible. Wallis's idea was to bounce a bomb along the top of the water over any torpedo nets or submerged debris before losing momentum and sinking right next to the dam wall. Once down to the required depth, the bomb, or mine as it was more accurately called, would explode. Here the surrounding water pressure would amplify the effect of the blast and lead to the collapse of the entire wall. Tests on scale models showed that the underwater blast caused by the mine would be enough to cause the collapse of the whole structure. The mine needed to have a significant explosive power to be effective. It would be very large. This photograph, taken at the Imperial War Museum, shows its huge size. Codename Upkeep and weighing 9,250 pounds, only the RAF's Lancaster bomber could be modified for it to fit. Wallis also determined the mine would have to be spun anti-clockwise as it was dropped. This helped with stability and would hold the mine against the dam wall as it sank. This backspin was achieved by using a belt drive from a motor mounted on the Lancaster. Final problem was how to aim the bomb. It had to be dropped at an exact height and distance. For height, two lights would be turned on by the bomb aimer that shone downwards. With the operation taking place at night, when the spotlights aligned, the aircraft was at exactly the required height of 60 feet. For distance, a bomb sight was constructed that used the towers on either side of the dam that were a known distance apart. There followed a period of intensive testing and training on reservoirs around the British Isles. This original film is one of those training exercises. With confirmation of good weather, on May 16, 1943, Operation Chastise was authorized to proceed that night. The raid would involve three formations taking off from RAF Scampton at different times following different routes. Several dams would be targeted in Germany on the edge of the Ruhr Valley. Formation 2, taking a longer route, would be the first to take off from Scampton at 9:28 p.m. The first aircraft to take off was piloted by Flight Lieutenant Norman Barlow. Then taking off at 1-minute intervals were Lancasters piloted by Munro, Byers and Rice. At 9:39 p.m., Formation 1, led by Wing Commander Guy Gibson, who was the squadron commanding officer, took off. The 9 aircraft of Formation 1 took off in threes on the more direct southerly route. To avoid radar, all aircraft would fly at a very low level, around 100 feet. Together with the fact that the whole operation would take place in the dark, this made for an extremely dangerous mission. At just after 10 p.m., Formation 2's last aircraft, piloted by Joe McCarthy, took off. He had been delayed due to technical problems and had to change aircraft, leaving him trailing the rest of the formation. Just before 11 p.m., Formation 2 approached the Dutch coast. The Lancaster, piloted by 23-year-old Canadian Vernon Byers, had drifted a little off course and was heading for the more heavily defended Texel. To the north, Munro's aircraft was approaching Vlieland as planned. As both aircraft crossed land, anti-aircraft fire started up. Having crossed Texel, Byers was hit. The Lancaster crashed into the sea, killing all crew. Operation Chastise had suffered its first casualties. Munro had also been hit, but was still able to fly. However, his communications equipment was destroyed, and without the ability for the bomber and pilot to be able to communicate, it would be impossible to perform a successful bombing run. Munro reluctantly turned for home. The Lancaster, piloted by Rice, now successfully navigated through Vlieland. He turned southeastwards. Suddenly, there was an enormous jolt. Rice instinctively pulled up. Water sprayed into the bomb bay. The Lancaster had hit the sea. The mine suspended under the aircraft had been ripped off. The difficulty of maintaining such a low altitude at night was made clear, and somehow the Lancaster kept in the air. The stunned crew had had a miraculous escape. However, without the weapon, Rice was also forced to turn for home. 3 of the 5 aircraft of Formation 2 had been lost to the operation as soon as they reached occupied enemy territory. Formation 2's lead aircraft, piloted by Barlow, now moved inland. Barlow, flying in the darkness at extremely low altitude, suddenly hit a power cable. The Lancaster crashed into the countryside, killing all crew. Formation 2 now only had 1 surviving Lancaster. At just after midnight, 5 Lancasters of Formation 3 took off from Scampton. This was the reserve formation. Their targets were not set and would be directed by radio to dams depending on what remained after the attacks by Formations 1 and 2. Meanwhile, Formation 1 crossed the Rhine. They unexpectedly ran into some light flak. Hopgood in the first group was hit. Hopgood himself was injured, as was the front gunner crewman. However, the crew decided to continue. The final trio also ran into flak. Aspel, who had fallen back a little, was hit by tracer. The Lancaster then hit an electrical pylon. The aircraft became engulfed in flames, and shortly after, the Lancaster exploded on impact with the ground. All 7 crew were instantly killed. Shortly afterwards, Formation 1 began arriving at the Mona Dam. Squadron leader Wing Commander Guy Gibson and his crew would be the first to start their bombing run. As the Lancaster approached the target, anti-aircraft fire opened up from both towers situated on the dam. Gibson dropped his upkeep mine. It bounced onto the target as designed, however it had been deployed a little too early and there was no noticeable damage to the dam. Next, Hopgood, whose aircraft had already been damaged by flak earlier, began his run. Hopgood was hit again as he approached the dam. An engine caught fire. The mine was released but too late and bounced over the dam, exploding on the power station below. Hopgood now desperately pulled up his stricken aircraft to give his crew a chance to bail out. 3 managed to do so, 2 would survive. Hopgood and 4 other crew members lost their lives. Up next was the Lancaster, piloted by Australian Martin. However, Wing Commander Gibson, having seen the demise of Hopgood, took it upon himself to fly alongside Martin as a diversion. This seemed to work, and Martin released his mine successfully, but for some reason it veered left and exploded 20 yards short of the dam. Young now began his run, with both Gibson and Martin flying diversionary flights alongside. The anti-aircraft fire started up once again from the dam, the Lancaster forward gunners furiously returning fire. Young's mine bounced to the target, scoring a direct hit. To the Lancasters of Formation 1 circling overhead, again there appeared to be no damage to the dam. There must have been some concern within Formation 1, as there was now less than half of the mines available that had taken off from Scampton earlier that night. However, unbeknown to the Lancaster crews, Young's mine had seriously weakened the dam, and in fact had caused a small breach. Next up, Maltby began his run. Again, Gibson and Martin flew alongside to draw away the enemy fire. Maltby's bomb aimer, John Fort, released the mine and the crew watched it bounce onto the target. Again, another direct hit. The 112-foot high dam now began to crumble. To the great excitement of Formation 1, a current of water began to flow through what was becoming a massive breach of the dam. Despite some losses, the operation had got off to a successful start with the first target destroyed. The code word indicating the Mona Dam had been breached was radioed back to command. Gibson now led the survivors of Formation 1 to their next target, the Eder Dam. Meanwhile, the Lancaster piloted by American Joe McCarthy had arrived at the nearby Sorpe Dam. On arrival, McCarthy realized he was the only member of Formation 2 to have made it to the target. The Sorpe Dam was a different construction to the Mona. This recent photo shows its earth construction, together with sloping sides. This made the dam unsuitable to use the upkeep mine in the way it was designed. Instead of bouncing the bomb onto the target, McCarthy would fly along the axis of the dam and drop the mine alongside, allowing it to roll down and sink before exploding. The dam was not defended, but it was a difficult target. McCarthy had to descend swiftly over the town of Langside, getting down to 30 feet to drop the mine and then climb quickly on the other side of the lake. So difficult was the approach, having to avoid a high church steeple over the town, that McCarthy made 9 runs trying to get his Lancaster in the correct position. On McCarthy's 10th attempt, his bomb aimer, Johnny Johnson, finally dropped the mine. The mine exploded, and it appeared to be in a perfect bombing run, but the dam remained intact. McCarthy headed for home. Following the destruction of the Mona Dam, Wing Commander Gibson had led Formation 1 to the Eder Dam. Unlike at Mona, there was no anti-aircraft defense, but the target was much more difficult. The lake was smaller and set in a deep valley, meaning that there was a much shorter approach. The Lancasters would have to drop down steeply, then turn hard to port before dropping the mine. Then the Lancaster had to pull up hard to avoid the hills on the other side. Shannon went first and had several attempts, but couldn't get down to a stable altitude of 60 feet within 400 to 450 yards of the dam that was required to release the mine accurately. The Lancaster had to use maximum power, pulling back as hard as possible, just to avoid crashing into the mountains after the dam. It made for an extremely dangerous and hair-raising bombing run for all the crew. Shannon, after a number of times, took a break, and Maudsley then attempted his run. He found it just as difficult and also failed to drop his mine. Shannon went again with 2 more dummy runs before finally managing to release the mine. It bounced twice and hit the dam. While Shannon believed it had caused a small breach, it was reported later that no damage to the dam was seen. Maudsley now attempted another run. He released his mine, but far too late, and it exploded directly on the dam without bouncing. Debris likely damaged the Lancaster, but Maudsley was able to keep his aircraft in the air for now. The Eder Dam was still intact, and now Formation 1 had only 1 mine left. Lancaster AGN, piloted by Australian Les Knight, presented the last opportunity for the formation to destroy the Eder Dam. He made 1 dummy run before Knight's bomb aimer was able to get the mine away. It bounced the prescribed 3 times before exploding on the dam. A large hole appeared in the dam at the 34-foot depth that the mine was designed to explode at. Water began gushing through the hole, the top of the dam now disintegrated. There was jubilation as Formation 1 had achieved both its objectives and the Mona and Eder dams had been destroyed, causing wide-scale flooding. Formation 1 now started the dangerous return journey for home. With Formation 1 and the sole survivor of Formation 2, McCarthy, having all completed their bombing runs, the reserve formation, Formation 3, could be given their targets. As the 5 Lancasters of Formation 3 headed towards the dams, the aircraft piloted by Burpee had crashed after running into flak while still over Holland. All crew were killed. Shortly afterwards, Otley, who was leading the group, was also hit by flak and crashed. Only the rear gunner survived. Meanwhile, the survivors of Formation 1 were heading home. Maudsley, who was likely nursing a damaged Lancaster after his mine had exploded directly on the Eder Dam, was heading towards the Dutch border when he was shot down by flak. There were no survivors. As Young was over the Dutch coast, he was also hit by flak. The Lancaster crashed, killing all crew. The 3 survivors of Formation 3 were directed to the Sorpe and Ennepe dams. Brown and his crew arrived at the Sorpe Dam. Visibility due to mist had worsened since McCarthy of Formation 2 had earlier made his attack. After several aborted attempts, Brown released his mine. The mine exploded, but no breach occurred. The aircraft piloted by Anderson, who was one of the least experienced pilots on the mission, had a malfunctioning rear turret, making it difficult to deal with searchlights. Having seen the poor visibility over Sorpe, and with dawn approaching, he decided to turn for home, still carrying the mine. The final aircraft of Formation 3 was piloted by Townsend and was sent to the Ennepe Dam, although he possibly bombed the Beaver Dam by mistake. After 3 attempts, the mine was released but exploded short of the dam, and there was no damage. The 3 remaining aircraft of Formation 3 would encounter flak on the way home, but there would be no further losses. Whether the operation can be considered a success is still open to debate. Casualties were high for 617 Squadron. 8 of the 19 Lancaster bombers were shot down, with 53 crewmen killed and 3 taken prisoner. The destruction caused by the raid was also not as great as had been hoped. The key dams were the Mona and Sorpe. When the Mona was destroyed, torrents of water flowed into the Ruhr River. Had the Sorpe also been destroyed, this would have deposited vast quantities of water into the same area, causing far greater damage. The main formation led by Gibson, after destroying the Mona Dam, flew on to attack the Eder instead. However, the Eder did not feed water into the same area as the Mona, and was chosen because of its stone construction and its suitability to be targeted by the upkeep mine. Whether it was ever possible for the raid to destroy the huge earth and clay dam of Sorpe is open to doubt, but it would have made more sense to have given it a greater priority. Formation 2, whose target it was, suffered heavy losses before they were even able to reach the dam. In the end, only McCarthy of Formation 2 and Brown of Formation 3 dropped mines on Sorpe. Even without the destruction of Sorpe, the raid caused considerable damage. Wide-scale flooding and a loss of electric power hampered armaments production, but the dams were repaired far quicker than had been anticipated. Thousands of slave labourers were brought in to achieve this. The hopes placed on a single raid by a single squadron seemed to have been far too optimistic. However, when considering what this single raid achieved, it's actually very impressive. It has also been speculated that a further opportunity had been lost by not following up the raid with further conventional bombing, which would have seriously hampered the repair operation, increasing the lasting effects of the operation. Regardless of the outcome, the British public marvelled at the sheer ingenuity and bravery of the raid, and it was widely celebrated. Operation Chastise remains one of the most daring and spectacular operations of the Second World War.